Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Arcade Crusade. Today's video, we are going to continue the Twilight Zone pinball restoration. This will be part 3 in the Twilight Zone restoration series. If you have not seen parts 1 and 2, I suggest you go back and watch those just so you're up to date with where we're at. Today's episode, we are mainly going to focus on rebuilding all 4 flippers in the game. Before we get started, I just want to point out a couple things when you're doing this. Just things to watch out for and things to pay attention to when you're rebuilding flippers. Alright, so I'm mounted up here, and first things first, when you're rebuilding flippers, you're going to have to pull the flipper bats themselves. I got brand new flipper bats. I got 3 brand new Williams flipper bats from Pinball Life, black Titan rubbers on them, and then Marco sells the correct mini flipper for Twilight Zone and a black Titan rubber on that. I got brand new bats because I figure if I'm taking everything apart, might as well put brand new bats on them. Aside from brand new bats, I got brand new flipper bushings. These are on the flipper bracket itself. This is the only part that you'll need to remove the entire flipper bracket to replace. It's worth doing. If you're going to take everything apart, you might as well do it. It's one extra step. Worth doing though, because they kind of keep your flippers from rocking around on the playfield. And then we have 2, here's the second one, I'll grab it. 2 flipper rebuild kits from Pinball Life, and these are from Bally Williams games from February 92 to March 93, which goes from, I want to say, Getaway High Speed 2 and then ends at Twilight Zone. These rebuild kits will have the shorter coil stops that you need for all of these games because they have a different range of motion than the Williams games after March 1993. So make sure you get the right coil stops when you order these kits, otherwise you will not be happy. You'll basically end up with a flipper that only flips up to here and you won't even be able to cradle a ball. Another thing is, so the way you want your flippers aligned, so there's 2 ways to align flippers. Actually, if you look, and I'll zoom a little bit and angle down. If you look right here, right where my finger's at, there is a hole in the playfield, and you could stick a toothpick in it to line up your flipper, and that's actually how they did it in the factory. I don't like doing that because over time things can shift. Yeah, that hole was made with proper alignment out of the factory, but it might not be the case anymore. What I like to do is I like to line up my flippers with my lane guides. So you want that ball to come down and come, perfectly straight on that flipper. There's a little drop here, but you don't want it, so like if your flipper's on a slight angle, imagine the ball comes down and does that, or if it's your lane guide's a little lower than your flipper, then it'll actually like hit the end of it. You just want to be on the same angle as your lane guide. With the upper flippers, you don't have as much freedom to, like this upper one here, pretty much just has to go against this post right here. So there's really no freedom there. The top left one, there is a little bit more freedom with that one, but again, you just want to go even with the lane guides so the flipper gets a good feed. And honestly, we spend thousands of dollars on these pinball machines, and I've gone to people's houses and their flippers aren't set up right, their balls aren't feeding the flippers right, and it's maybe $30, $40 in parts. For this game, it was $40 in parts to rebuild all 4 flippers or something like that, maybe 50. But you spend this little amount in parts, and the flippers are the most important part of the game, so you should definitely do it, especially if you're going to be taking the game apart to shop it. You might as well rebuild your flippers. That being said, though, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to point out. Just be aware. Oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out, when you're doing flippers, Williams used to sell these tools, and now Marco sells them. It's a 0.7 millimeter spacer you put between the flipper bat post and the playfield, and that is how much spacing you're supposed to have with your flipper before you tighten it up. That way you aren't dragging on the playfield and you got enough play above the playfield that you won't scratch it up. So you'll need one of these, or most like gift cards, hotel room cards, older credit cards. New ones, thickness is, they're getting a little thicker than they used to be. Most of those are 0.7 millimeters, so you could just cut an indentation like that, and then you have a way to come in here and do your flipper spacing. So that's the other thing you'll need aside from the parts, because you need to do this. And if you're doing end of stroke switches, you'll need an end of stroke adjustment tool. On WPC games, your end of stroke isn't as important as other games, because it's normally open on this and only closed when you make a full end of the stroke. So they don't get as much wear as Williams games pre-Fliptronics. So yeah, you really don't need to worry about end of stroke switches as much on this one. The suggested, there's a suggested spacing for them. I can't remember what it is. I'll have to check. I used to have a tool to do the right end of stroke adjustment, and I cannot find it. After I moved, a lot of my tools got shifted and they got thrown in boxes, and I do not know where my end of stroke adjustment is. So we're just gonna eyeball it. Maybe we'll measure with a ruler just to see that we're in the ballpark for the end of stroke gap. But it's not as important on Fliptronics games as it is on the earlier games, because earlier games, those switches are normally closed and then they're open, so the contacts are always touching. On this one, they aren't touching that much, only when you're at the end of your stroke. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. I'll lift the playfield and then we will get set up. I'll do the upper flipper first. The top left flipper, we'll do that one first because it's right in the middle of the playfield, and that's definitely the easiest one to look at. Just because the bottom flippers are so high up, I won't really get a good camera angle. So really this one right here in the center of our playfield is going to give us the best viewing angle for what we're trying to accomplish here. All right, get the camera set up here. Make my light a little bit brighter. And then we will zoom in. And what we're looking at right there is that yellow flipper coil. All right, just make sure we're all tight here. All right, so we're set up there. The first thing I do when I'm going to be rebuilding flippers is I just undo this spring here. We have a new spring included in the kit. Should be included in the kit, yeah. 2 new springs included in the kit for both ones. So you're gonna be replacing those springs anyway, so it's not like it matters what order you take them off. I just do it to get tension off the flipper. So the spring just kind of wraps around and pull it out. Of course, I'm stuck. There we go. And the spring's undone, so now it's just sitting on the bracket. The next thing is, let me see what size this is. This is a 5/32 Allen wrench. I do my coil stop next, and I just get the coil out of the way. Yeah, this thing is just, I hope we don't need a new, this is the only, I think the only coil stop I haven't really looked at, and I hope we don't need a new mounting assembly. Yeah, this thing is all junked up. Another thing to pay attention to while we're here, before we take this apart, you always want the diode side, so the side with the solder connections and the diodes, you want the diode side of the coil to be away from the coil stop. So what we just took off, this is the coil stop, and basically the coil just bangs, it goes in there and it just bangs the end of the coil and just hits it. And when you put the diode side by the coil stop, it's just sitting there getting banged on that end, and it can actually break diodes and do all sorts of things that you don't want it to do. So alright, let me get this coil stop out. There we go. And let's see if we got enough there. We got enough space to free the coil, and then I'm just gonna hang it right there. So that coil's done. Pull the, we're not changing the coils out. These coils are good. So I'm gonna pull the old coil sleeve out. It's pretty gunked up, it's not bad. These are like, I don't know, 50 cents to replace, but I mean, look at how dirty these parts are. These are like 50 cents to replace, so you might as well replace them if you're rebuilding flippers. So that's out of there. So now we just have our end of stroke switch and then the flipper assembly itself. We're gonna replace the end of stroke with a new one, but we gotta get this undone first. So what I like to do is take my Allen key, 5/32, and put it in here. And then take a, let me see what this is, 3/8. It's a 3/8 socket. But yeah, take that, put it on here, and then we're just gonna loosen our flipper bat, and that's it. Alright, so now we're pretty much at the point where our flipper, let me just reach around to the playfield here. Our flipper should pull right out of the playfield. See if I gotta loosen that a little bit more. And it's just got like a weird angle in it. There we go. So now our mini flipper is pulled right out of the playfield, and we got our old linkage assembly off. And actually the new linkage assemblies, they don't even have this 5/32 screw. It is just the 3/8 nut. The other side I think is like riveted. But yeah, that's the mini flipper off and the assembly off. So all of these parts, I'm just throwing down by the coin door. These are all just junk. Yeah, I mean, you got to think, if this game has been out since 1993 and it's never had its flippers rebuilt, so it's really something you should do. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the actual bracket itself, because we need to get to this flipper bushing. So I'm just going to take out one screw at a time, and then we are going to replace the bushing. And it's just 8 1/4" wood screws here. And just make sure you pay attention to how exactly this thing was mounted. And I'm actually just going to take a picture just so I have it when I'm putting this back together. So now we're just down to our last screw. We'll just get this one loose. And there it is, all 8 of them out. And now we can get to the bushing. The reason you need to take this off, if you look at the back side of this bushing, it has nuts on the back side, screws on the one side, nuts on the back side. And if you try to do this while on, well, one, you're not gonna be able to get the new one on, and two, the nuts will just fall down. I mean, otherwise, this bracket's in pretty good shape. I just hope our threads aren't screwed up for the coil stop, but we'll see with the new ones. Let me get the spring off this. All right, and then, yeah, I'm gonna replace this end of stroke switch because I have a new one, and this one's, I mean, it's not that bad a shape, but we'll replace it. All right, so let me get a bit for that, just rest that there. Just a normal screwdriver bit. So we got both of those off. Dropped the bracket for it, but I got it. And now our entire bracket assembly is free. So I'm gonna go give this a wash, and yeah, we'll probably take that off as well. I don't know, we might be able to leave the coil bracket on for that. But I'm just gonna clean this thing up, and then basically we are going to come back, we're gonna take this flipper bushing off and put a new one on. So give me a second, I'll go clean it. So we've got the entire bracket pulled out of the cabinet, and I just hand started the putting the new end of stroke switch on, because we can do that now that we have it off. But yeah, it's just gonna go on with the 2 screws and then the mounting plate on the back side of it. So all you need to do is just get this in like a loose place of where you want it to be, tighten it down, and then we can adjust it later once we actually are setting the end of stroke gap and how we want it to actually hit with our flipper. But really just look at it from the side. If it seems straight, you know, that's pretty much all you want right now. All right, and like that, our end of stroke is on. The next thing we're gonna do is take this flipper bushing off. I already got one of the screws started. Some of these brackets will actually be threaded aside, like the nut is just there for security, but the bracket itself will be threaded. Some of them weren't threaded. This one, I already loosened this side, and then it's just, yeah, it seems like this one's threaded because these are going on like no problem, or I mean pulling out like no problem. And then, well, I ordered new flipper bushings. I also ordered new hardware for this. So I have brand new screws and nuts from Pinball Life as well. All right, so we can pull that off completely. Let me find where that last screw went. There it is. All right, so that's completely off. We have our brand new one right here, and it's just gonna line up with the same holes that we pulled that one out of, and you basically just want it to mount the exact same way. So it's going to be our screws on the top side here. Your short side is going to be up with your end of stroke switch. Our screws are going to be on this side, and then the nuts are going to be on the back side. So I'm going to get 3 of these out, and then 3 nuts out. And all I'm gonna do here is just get the 3 of these just hand tight, because this bracket actually has threads in the metal. So you can just get them started, and then once you get them started, you can put the nut behind it and actually tighten them down. All right, there's all 3 of them. Brand new screws, brand new end of stroke switch. We're snugged up here, not super tight, and we're snugged up on this one. And then we are just gonna come to the back side and put these new nuts on. And again, Pinball Life sells the screws and the nuts for this. So that's where all of this hardware came from. I wanna say they're like 6/32 is the size of the screws. There's my screwdriver. I'm just going to tighten all of these up by hand, and then to finish it off, we can come at it with a wrench. But yeah, all I'm gonna do is just come to the back side here, and we're just gonna snug these up. And these are made out of nylon, so they have some play, but you really want all of your flipper components to be really tight, especially your coil stop. Flipper bushing, you obviously don't want any play in it. So yeah, that's it. Those are all tight. Got the new flipper bushing on. We got the end of stroke switch on. So now it's at the point where it can actually go back on the playfield. All right, took some real adjusting, but I bent the spring enough to be able to get it around the hole. So we got it in this first hole right by the end of stroke switch. So now it's ready to get hooked up to the flipper bat once, well, the linkage, once we actually slide it through. But now we can put this back on the bottom of the playfield. So we got our brand new flipper bushing in, and we can just get a few of these wood screws started by hand and then snug this thing up. And I purposely left my end of stroke switch here wired up, just so that now that we're mounted, the next thing we're gonna do once we're got all these screws in is we're gonna transfer the wires from this end of stroke switch to the new end of stroke switch. So I don't have my soldering iron over here. I gotta go grab it, but we're gonna do that. So I'm just getting all these started by hand to make sure that we're not bending any of the adjustment. Well, not bending, but you know, make sure we're fully hitting these wood screws, because if you don't go back in the same way that you pulled them out, you're just gonna create more wear on the bottom of the playfield and it won't hold as tight. So I'm just kind of tightening these all about the same, and then we can crank all of them down. All right, I'm gonna snug all these down. All right, we're completely snug. The only thing now is we will transfer these wires over in the exact same fashion as they're soldered on. So we'll do the bottom orange two first, then we'll do the black, the ground one second. We'll get those soldered on, and then we're at the point where we can actually slide the new flipper bat in, put the new linkage on, and I mean that's pretty. I mean that and the new coil sleeve are the entirety of the rebuild. So let me go get my soldering iron. We'll get set up to solder that, and we'll solder on the end of stroke switch. All right, so I got my soldering iron and I went ahead and I soldered the black wire on. We got a nice strong connection, and the two orange wires, we got a nice strong connection. I made sure we're tight on the end of stroke here. I ran the spring to the flipper link, and right now I have the flipper fed through the playfield, and I have it fed through right now, and I have it snug. I don't have it super tight, I have it snug because we'll need to adjust it on top of the playfield. But now at least the new flipper link is in. We have our new spring hooked up, and it's going just how we want it to be. So now all that's left is we have a brand new coil sleeve, and this is just going to go in. All right, so the way this is going to go on is just like this. And the way it is on the other flipper with the sleeve through, just like this. All right, let me just make sure that is the correct way that the coil sleeve went in. I believe it is. I'm just gonna look at one of these upper ones. Yep, just like that. We got the coil sleeve pushed all the way through. So we got the flange side of it on the end where our coil stop's gonna go. We got our diode side away from the coil stop. So now we're at the point where all we have to do is put the new coil stop in, which just goes right into the new coil sleeve. And then we can put these back in. And you wanna make sure you really crank down these coil sleeve screws, because this is where your flippers are going to take the most abuse, and you really want to crank these things down when you tighten them up. I'm just getting these started by hand. Alright, so those are started by hand. I got my bit for this right here. Right, we got that one pretty tight, and we will just snug up this one. Now when you do this, I forgot to mention, actually, you want to be squeezing the two brackets together while you're tightening, just to make sure you have a nice strong, you want no play in your coil. So like I said, you want to squeeze those two brackets together. All right, that's about as tight as I can get that one. Yep, that's as tight as they will go. All right, so now we got our coil. We never undid anything with, but we have the new coil sleeve, new coil stop, new bolts there, new end of stroke switch, new linkage. This we just have to adjust how we want it. We make sure it's 7 millimeters from the playfield, but everything's wired up and good to go. So we can just drop the playfield like halfway so we can still get in there. but then we can adjust what we need to adjust. So I'm just gonna get the playfield down to like there-ish. And we'll see if we can get an angle like back over here. Yeah, it should work. So I'm gonna come at it from underneath, and then I'm just trying to line up this flipper right here with this guide. So really, like I said, all I'm gonna do is take my gap tool from Marco's, and we will take our socket, and we just wanna make sure that one, we have our gap, and two, all right, so there's our gap tool. I'm just gonna hold it like that, and then we are just gonna come under here There we go. We got our angle just how we want it. Yeah, it's perfect. We're nice and tight. We had our adjustment tool in the right spot. All right, that's nice and tight. It's kind of hard to show in like both spots where I'm at, but you really just want to make sure you get your flipper gap right so you don't nick your playfield. And you really just want to, I mean, there is a hole here to line up with a toothpick, but I just line it up by sight and kind of how the old one was. Now that we have this one, let me double check. Let me lift the playfield fully. All right, so we got the new one completely wired up now, and we didn't touch our solenoid, but we got a new coil sleeve in it. We got a new coil stop. New spring is on, new end of stroke. Both wires soldered on. We just tightened our linkage, and we got a little bit of flipper play there. Actually, we may want to adjust that. Seems like a little too much play. We got nice smooth movement, and might just have to adjust the leafs on our end of stroke just a little bit. Seems pretty good where they're at though. Yeah, it seems pretty good. All right, so I'm gonna clean up all the parts I have in the bottom of the cabinet, and then we'll go ahead and test this. So let me clean up, I'll get the camera set up, and we'll test this flipper coil. All right, I got the playfield lifted back up. Our flippers are fully adjusted how we want it to be. And we have the game on, and we're in test. So right now we can just hit the flippers, and we can just make sure that our end of stroke looks good. Make sure that there's no play in the coil stop. You know, make sure everything's tight and looks good. We got a springy coil. So there it is, all the way closed. And let me zoom in. That's exactly how we want our end of stroke switch to be. So it's open, normally open. and fully closed. We're getting a nice springy hit. You can see nothing's moving. When we hit it, we got no play in that flipper bushing. I mean, we're looking nice and tight. So that looks good. Let's lower the playfield and try taking a look at it with an actual game. Just make sure the flipper has good power. It's at the right angle that we want it to during gameplay. I got the balls out of the game right now. Let me put them back in the trough. All right, we'll just kind of get this set up here so you can see the upper left flipper actually in play. All right, so let me back out of test. All right, start a game. And then all we're gonna do is I'm gonna keep throwing this ball around the right loop so we can feed that upper left flipper, and we're just gonna test the strength of it, make sure the piano shot geometry is right. And then after that, we're going to test the camera shot. We're gonna test the camera shot behind the flipper. It just did something when it was doing the ball search. Okay, there we go. So that's right around that loop, just exactly where I would expect that shot to be. And you shoot the piano exactly how you want it to be. With that shot. Let me try the camera shot. There we go. Camera shot just goes right down, right behind it, doesn't nick the flipper. We're looking pretty solid. There we go. And we'll light the right spiral again, shoot around. All right. Yeah, I mean, it's hitting right in the sweet spot of the flipper, right? I mean, obviously with a little bit of velocity, but it's hitting right where we want it to be hitting. It's right off the tip of that flipper. All right, so our flipper looks good. It's having no hang-ups. It's nice and strong. End of stroke looks good. So now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna run through and build this right flipper. And I'll probably just do a time lapse on it because it's gonna be exactly the same as that upper left flipper was. And we'll just go through, we'll film that. I'll point out if there's any snags that I hit. And we'll do that one on camera, and then we'll do the bottom two off camera. And once we get everything hooked up, I'll walk through it. All right, so we got this one completely built together and adjusted, but on this coil, the coil sleeve actually melted to the inside of the coil, and I even took a pair of pliers, tried to pull it out, but it is melted inside of there. It will not come out. So I'm gonna have to order a new flipper coil, an 11722 for this upper right flipper. But I have it fully adjusted. I soldered the end of stroke switches on. The spring is on. I mean, it's completely ready to go. I just got to get a new coil, solder that on, and then put the coil stop on, and this one will be done. So I guess I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to start working on the top two flippers, and hopefully we don't have another stuck coil sleeve. So I'll get that ordered, and we'll get working on that once it comes in the mail. All right, so we got all four flippers rebuilt now. I did the lower two, brand new flipper bats, Titan rubbers, new flipper bushings on the bracket, new end of stroke switches. Everything's tightened up. We're lined up with the lane guides here. Ball slides perfectly down the way you would want it to, right down the lane guides. We even have both of them with the same range of motion, so you can see it even locks a ball in there, but they're exactly even, just how you want them to be. So they're lined up and they're both locking balls. I have not turned the game on because we still have the coil dismounted on the upper right flipper. I ordered that and it should be in the mail. You know, hopefully I should get it within 3 days, then we can get all of that back together. But all of them are lined up, completely tightened. I just got to put that new coil on. I even cleaned up solder on the both coils. Someone had replaced both coils on the lower two, and they just did a terrible solder job. So that's been cleaned up. So while we're waiting for that coil, we can't really call the flippers finished, even though that coil will take like 2 seconds. The other thing, since we have some extra time in this episode, the other thing I want to do is I want to start pulling the subway troughs underneath the playfield. I'm just gonna lift the playfield up. And there you can see that coil that's still hanging there. All right, so get the camera lined up here. Twilight Zone has 3 subway troughs under its playfield, and one of them, I'll zoom into it. One of them is right up there by the green coil, the top right one, and that goes from where you plunge the ball to the slot machine kick out. The other one, well, the other two, it's got the main one here that connects the gumball machine, the piano hole, and the camera shot. All 3 of these shots, so here, here, and here, are all connected by this big subway trough here. And there's actually a proximity sensor on this subway that's how it identifies where the power ball is at, both on that proximity sensor, and then there's one up on the main trough where the balls kick out. So this one has 3 switches and a proximity sensor that we'll need to take off, or yeah, 3 switches. Okay, and then the other the other one is down by the gumball popper. These are very high areas of wear. Any game that has a subway, a lot of the game usually revolves around whatever shot is the subway shot, and in Twilight Zone there's literally 5 of them. So you have 5 different shots that are going through a subway, so the ball, you know, when a game gets dirty, the balls get dirty and it dirties up these subways. So anytime I'm doing a shop out, I always clean these up. These are really the only dirty things on the underside of this playfield. I mean, even the gumball machine's pretty clean. That's got a little bit of dirt and we'll clean that the best we can. But everything else on the underside of this playfield is pretty good. So we're just gonna start pulling off these subways, and the way I normally do this is if they have switches on them, the gumball one down here, it has a switch on it, and if it has a switch on it, what I do is I just take the switch screws off. So I'm gonna start by initially just taking off all the wood screws that attach the subway to the playfield itself. So it has 1, 2, 3, it's got 5. I'll take off this back one first. And then what's gonna happen is we take this off, then we take the switch off for it, and actually I'll take this one off next because this has something. When I take screws off, I try to take off whichever ones have the most in the way first. That way when it's hanging on, it's just hanging on by the 2 that are most accessible. All right, so that's 3 of the wood screws. There is 4, and we just got 1 left up here. And I probably should have done this when we had the gumball popper out and put the new one in, but I wasn't even thinking of cleaning at the time because I was just trying to get the game working. So we're gonna see if it's possible for us to just shift this out of here. It might be a situation where we may have to remove the gumball popper to get in here, or at least loosen it so we can get it out. There we go. All right, so yeah, it definitely would have been easier to do that when we had the entire bracket off, but it is what it is. So yeah, all I'm gonna do is come at this switch and undo the mounting screws for it. And I just have a little Phillips screwdriver for this. There's 1 out. And there's 2 out. Let me just tighten this back into the switch so we don't lose this. All right, so now our gumball popper trough is freed up. And it's actually not super dirty. It just looks a little bit smoked. But it does have some dirt in it, so we'll get that nice and cleaned up. And then the other one that I want to take out, I'm not going to take out the main trough right now. I'm going to do that one last. The other one we're going to take off is the one up here. And that's pretty much the same thing, just more wood screws we got to take out. This one looks to just be 4 wood screws. Move our coil out of the way. All right. All right, and that is all 4 screws for that one, so that one's free. We can take that one off. All right, that's completely out. So this one actually does have a bit of dirt in the bottom of it. So I'm just gonna take these, clean them with some soapy water, maybe run some Novus through, and we'll just completely clean up these plastics. And then once we do these two, we'll get them mounted back in the playfield, and then we will take the big trough off. And I just need to look at the big subway and kind of see, I mean, I know we have 3 switches to take off. I got to figure out if that proximity board has to come off and figure out everything for it. So I'm gonna go clean these and then we'll install these back on. All right, so I got the gumball trough completely cleaned up, washed it in hot soap and water, and then cleaned it with some Novus. And then same with the one coming off the plunge to the slot machine, cleaned up with some Novus. I mean, these are crystal clear now. This one is smoked. That one should be clear. That one's always gonna be smoked. So now we're just gonna go through and we are going to take off this main subway here. So to get this one off, there is 3 switches in total. There's one up here, which I've already taken off, just 2 screws to take it off. And then there's one down here, which I just loosened the screws for. So that one's out of the way now. And then there's another one over here. And I'm trying to still get these while it's mounted to the playfield, because these aren't in terrible spots to take this off. All right, we just got to make sure we don't lose these two. All right, and make sure, guys, when you do this, take a bunch of pictures along the way. You don't want to lose, well, 1, you don't want to lose parts, but 2, you don't want to, I'm just gonna take these out. 1, you don't want to lose parts, but 2, you don't want to take this whole thing together and realize you have no pictures of how it goes back together. All right, so we got all 3 switches disconnected here. The other thing is, so this is actually mounted to the ramp itself, so when taking the ramp off, you can leave this on. I will remove it when I'm cleaning it, but just, you know, then I can take it apart, put it back together on the bench. So all you need to do is just pull off this 4-pin connector here. All right, so that connector's off, and that's all the small stuff. So now we can just start taking out the wood screws, and that's it. This one's gonna be kind of weird to clean just because of the size of it. The other ones, I just got a bucket with some hot soap and water and scrubbed them. This one, with the size of it, it's going to be probably a pretty big pain to do this. All right. One here as well. We'll go from this side now. I'm just trying to get the edges undone. That way it's still held on in the middle. And while you guys have this off, I recommend going into the all of the metal brackets here where the ball drops into. While you have these off, I'm not going to pull these during my teardown. These are going to stay on the playfield. So while you have these off, just take some Novus and try to get inside of there and clean these, because these have dirt that build up on them as well. Lamp board's in the way, but I think I'm sneaking this one out. Yeah, it's all right. All right, so we're almost at the point where this thing's free. There we go. See, I wonder if anyone had ever replaced this subway at one point, because there's a hole right here by this 47. There's a hole right here, and there's a hole on the playfield, and it doesn't line up. All the ones we've already pulled from, it lines up, but on this corner one, it doesn't line up there, and it's kind of weird. Let's see if we can get in at this one. All right, so now the only one holding it on is the one up here. All right, and now it is free from the playfield entirely. Really just this lamp socket that's in the way, and now we're just kind of fighting cords and stuff. We're almost at the point where this thing can just pull right out, and the size of this thing is just, it's not easy to work with, I'll say that. All right, completely loose now. Let me just put this behind it, and we want this switch out of the way now. Make sure that is behind it, that's unhooked, and then we're just fighting this zip tie here and pull it out. All right, so that is the entire subway trough, main subway for this game pulled off. It wasn't too bad to take off, and like I said, this proximity sensor, it's just going to come off with, it's on these posts, 2 screws on each side, so we can pull that off. But now we're at the point where we can just clean this entire thing. I mean, this thing's pretty dirty from all the years it's been played, so kind of at the point where we can clean this entire thing, wash it with some soap and water, put some Novus on it, and then we'll get it back into the playfield, get all the switches back on, and after that, we're pretty much done with underneath the playfield. Everything's pretty much been rebuilt. It seems like the proximity sensor in the trough is a little flaky, so one of the boards up there may need to be reflowed with some new solder. We'll see if it was just an issue with one of the connectors or one of the boards, but may have to do that under the playfield. But besides that, it's just going to be changing bulbs to LEDs, and then we can start a topside teardown. But all right, I'm gonna go ahead and wash this in some soap and water, and then we'll get it back on the playfield. All right, guys, so we got the main subway back on the game. Like I said, I completely pulled this off, unhooked everything. We took this board off, it just came off with 2 screws. And I basically just washed this down with hot soap and water, and then I cleaned all the plastic with Novus. And then once I completely polished it up with Novus, I put it back on the game. We hooked up all 3 switches and the proximity board, and we're good to go there. Back on, it looks like new. While I had it off, I cleaned inside the slot machine scoop, and then inside the piano scoop, and then the camera, and then back by the gumball. So all of these have been completely cleaned up. And then on top of that, I just got the new coil in the mail from Pinball Life, and I just wired it up. I transferred over wire by wire, just desoldering the old one, soldering the new one on, and then I went ahead and put the coil stop on. So what I do when I put the coil stops on, I squeeze the coil together and then tighten them up. So our final coil is on. That was the final piece of the puzzle. So now all 4 of our flippers are completely rebuilt. This one has a new coil. The rest of them, new links and to stroke switches, sleeves, coil stops, hardware, spring. These are completely cleaned up. All of our subways and all of our holes are completely cleaned up. So now really the only thing we have left to do under the playfield is just doing LEDs on the inserts and LEDs on the GI. And then once we do that, we'll be on to doing a topside teardown. We can do new rubbers and clean the rest of the game, but we're almost there. So let me pull the playfield down and we can see how these flippers are performing. Yeah, no issue hitting the piano. Lock this ball so I can talk. No issue backhanding the right ramp. So on Twilight Zone, you should be able to hit the left ramp and the right ramp from either flipper. You can either backhand the right ramp off the right flipper or backhand the left ramp off the left flipper. And before, they were too weak and there was too much play in them for that to happen. And if you remember before, our coil stops, they were different lengths. Now our flippers are at the exact same height when you have them held up. And we got the exact amount of range of motion we want from all four flippers. I mean, these are looking great. Brand new bats, brand new rubbers, but. And there's that backhand off the left flipper. Yeah, no issue, three-way combo right into the piano. Let me get this. Yeah, I don't have all the balls loaded in the gumball machine. Flippers. Nice and snappy. So that's pretty much how you do an entire flipper rebuild. If you're gonna do one, just do the entire game. Like I said, these flippers have not been rebuilt since 1993. So it's worth doing. It's the most important part of your game. It's the only thing you interact with on the game. There's no reason not to rebuild your flippers. And if you're at it, if you got old dirty bats, I mean, these flippers are only like I think these new bats are like $5. So put new bats, put new rubbers on them, and now, I mean, the playfield already looks a lot better than it did before just from that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. So, yeah, so in this episode, we got the flippers rebuilt. We got all the subways clean. So now we're at a point where we can just do LEDs on the playfield. Yeah, LEDs underneath the playfield, and then we're just gonna start tearing things down. I think my game plan for tearing things down, I'm gonna start with the mini playfield, then start taking the ramps off. And anything on top of the playfield that I'm gonna change the lights for, I'll do it while I'm tearing it down, like the slot machine and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for this episode. Thanks for watching, guys. Next video, we're just gonna keep working on it. We're gonna get the LEDs going, And then after that, it's just going to be a tear down and cleaning, and this project will be done. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. See you guys soon.